My name is Richard Wayne. I've been with the chapter for several years. I'm the events chair, and I usually coordinate these meetings. So I'm happy to see you all. We do have a few new faces that I'm not sure have participated in one of our monthly meetings before, which it's been since October. In November, we had a 50th birthday party that some of us attended for the chapter at the Plano Environmental Center. And then in December, there was a film screening. And now we're back on track with meetings. So a few of you folks, we may not have met yet in meetings. We do have special speakers today, and Rebecca will introduce those folks in a few minutes, and some of their friends as well. But if you've never attended one of our meetings before, if you would say hello and maybe a minute or two about why you're here, we would greatly appreciate it. If you're ultra shy, you can do it through chat, but we would prefer you do it through the wonders of technology. So if you'll raise your hand, then Jigna, you look eager to go.
Not really, but I just thought I'd get it over with. I'm Jigna. Hi, I met Alex and a few others at the October meeting training in Houston. And I've been on the environmental journey myself for many years and just been looking for more ways to get involved. So that's why I'm here.
She's also on our social media team.
Wonderful. And we love that accent.
Oh,
Anybody else have their hand up?
Mel does.
Mel? Oh, there you are, Mel. How are you, Mel?
I'm fine, Richard. How are you?
I'm good.
I've known Richard for a dozen or more years. I'm a retired pastor, United Methodist, and have been involved in climate work for over 20 years. I did the inconvenient treat at my church back in the when it first came out. So, but I just finally was able to schedule the training in Houston and went to that. And I'm glad to be a part of the group and the faith working group that Alex chairs.
Great. Let's see. Any other hands up that I'm not seeing? We got. Okay. And one other thing about Mel and Deacon Joey, they are both into creation justice, which is a very interesting concept that I think we all should be aware of, and perhaps they can talk about that at some point this year. It's a very important movement within the Christian community to be pro-environment. Did I sum that up okay, Mel, or did I mess that up?
I think it transcends more than the Christian community. I think you could say faith communities in
Faith
general.
community.
And I was part of a panel discussion last Sunday from the Interfaith Environmental Alliance of Houston that included Christian, Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist representation. So we're across the board.
Wonderful. And I think that's an important group to work with for us to make progress, especially in this country. So did I get everybody? Anybody else here?
Richard, Peri Caylor had her hand up for a minute ago.
Peri, please say hello. You're on mute.
Hi, I was just clapping for Mel. And for
okay.
Jenna too. It was nice to hear those introductions. Thank you.
Anybody else want to say hello? They haven't been here before, or if you're shy, put something in chat. That's okay. We love for you to be interactive, but that's okay. We have a big tent, a big umbrella. Okay, so I think that's it, unless I'm missing anybody. Thank you all for being here. And we've got a great agenda today. I'll post it a few times in the chat. It's hard to find a good way to post it. It was in the last invitation, the not last version, but it's pretty similar. So we're going to move ahead with the land acknowledgement. Jim, if you would do that for us.
I will. Make sure you can hear me. I've got a new Bluetooth speaker. We're all good? Okay. We at the Climate Reality Dallas Fort Worth chapter acknowledge the ongoing harm caused by colonialism and white supremacy perpetuated in Texas. Indigenous communities have suffered genocides and forced removals from their lands. We recognize that we are all standing on land stolen from indigenous people, particularly those of Kickapoo, Wichita, Tawakoni, Humanos, and Comanche in the FW areas. We are committed to cultivating mindfulness around the history of native lands and communities through continuous education, participation, and active listening.
Thank you, Jim. And we conduct our meetings according to democratic principles, specifically the Jimenez principles. Simon, if you would mention those, we'd appreciate it. And those are attached to the agenda as well.
Of course. So our rules here for our meetings are to make space or take space, limiting your comments to 2 minutes or less. Speak from the I perspective instead of generalizing. Practice active listening and seek to understand. Assume good intentions. Respect one another's space, time, and interest. Be willing to be uncomfortable. Be open to productive discomfort. Remember that intent does not negate impact. Disagree without discord. Personal attacks and labeling have no place in our chapter. And accept that there is no quick fix for the issues we discuss here.
Thank you, Simon. Beth, you're with the Creatives Group. Tell us a little about that.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and happy January, happy 2023. The next event that we're producing is going to be a co-production from the creatives and from the community building group. We're bringing in an eco-artist by the name of Laurie Marshall. And here's what she says. She'll be sharing her work, making collaborative murals based on the mutualism of trees called the Singing Tree Mural Project. It was inspired by an 8-year-old girl who asked, what if the whole world made a painting together? In the years that it's been going on, there's what she calls a growing forest of 115 murals made by 21,000 people from 52 countries. Each mural envisions a positive future for the earth, to community challenges, and sparks innovative action. So she's going to come in and talk to us, and I'm also going to be inviting other people from the Texas chapters and chapters beyond Texas as well. So that's the announcement. It's going to be on Saturday, February the 25th at 10 o'clock. All are welcome. If you have a kid in school, this might be something that you want your school to bring in for the students. If you're a teacher, this might be something that you want to do. So it really is for everyone. So now I'm going to shift to our opening contemplation. And these are thoughts that come from Dr. Nan Liu, who is a Qigong master and a TCM doctor. And he explains to us that traditional Chinese medicine understands the season and how we humans and the season reflect each other and affect each other. The interplay between the seasons and us, our bodies, our wellness, our body, heart, mind, and spirit, the whole dynamic of us. So he has offered these guidelines to us as food for thought. He says that winter is a time of reset. When we look at nature, it doesn't look from the ground up like anything is happening, but he says from the ground down, lots is happening. A preparation is happening. He says that it is the time of resetting. His suggestions to all of us include get plenty of sleep, good quality of sleep. Try to get to bed before midnight at the latest. They actually suggest 10, but midnight at the latest. Get enough good food, not too much, not too little. This is not the season for fasting. Avoid over sweating when you work out. Eat root vegetables. So those are some practical things that you can do to assist your body in resetting. The thoughts are, what are you resetting into? As a person, as an environmentalist, our chapter. He says when we update or upgrade our computers, we reboot. He said our minds are our software. So reboot. What is the you that you are resetting into? I offer this ancient wisdom rooted in the earth as our food for thought for the day and season. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, Rebecca's been advocating for this topic for quite some time, and she managed to pull it all together. So, Beth, I'm sorry, Rebecca, if you would talk about that and introduce our speakers, we'd greatly appreciate that.
Sure. I don't know. I mean, pull it together. I feel like Peri and Pamela are about to do the legwork here, but I am so happy to make the introductions of Peri Caylor from one of the California chapters. Is it the San Fernando Valley chapter? And while she gets off of mute.
Sorry. No, I'm actually up in the San Francisco Bay Area down by Stanford University on the San Francisco Peninsula, and it's the Bay Area chapter.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And, Pamela Tate, who's from the Chicago Climate Reality chapter. And I met them actually through the introduction of Roger, who connected me with the head of the coalition group where I met Peri and Pamela. His name is Don. And this group has been coming together for the last maybe 6 months in order to prepare for the Farm Bill 2023. So Peri and Pamela are coming in today to educate all of us about regenerative agriculture, which is something I mentioned on one slide a year ago. So I'm excited for us to dive deeper into that, why it's important, why we need it for our plans as we continue to move forward to carbon neutral, net zero. And then Pamela is going to talk about how we can actually take action with this information. The Farm 2023 bill is being discussed in Congress now. And so comments and lobbying is all open. So we have come together as a coalition of chapters across the United States to best advocate for the policies of regenerative agriculture and how best to get them included. So with that, I will let Peri and Pamela take over. Peri's going to start off with what is regenerative agriculture, if we have figured out how to allow shareable screens at this point.
Yes, I think we have.
All right, now that I can do that, let me find the presentation. Can you see my screen as I'm scrolling?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, hold on here. Here we go.
I'll just comment that Beth's discussion about resetting is really apropos to the day, because regenerative agriculture is greatly about what is happening underground right now. And above ground as well.
Now we see Pam.
Okay, great. Now I'm gonna gotta get the slideshow started here. Let's see, there we go. Well, however, it's hidden underneath the Zoom tab.
If you click the little screen toward the bottom, that should do it. Where it gives a little higher to the right. That one.
There we go. I'm sorry. Okay,
Click that, see if that does it.
there we go.
But we're still oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay.
You might be sharing, so do you have multiple screens?
I think if you share the single slide, the large slide, that looks like full screen. Does that?
It should be full screen, but I can't figure. I'm not so great at the screen share piece of this, but
If you go to the very top where it says display settings on the left of the top of your screen and hit that drop down arrow, you'll
It's
have
the center.
Yeah,
Center.
over the show taskbar, go one to the right of that. Display settings.
Do you see?
If you'll hit display settings, you'll have options.
there we go.
Now, you can duplicate the slideshow or you can swap the other view.
Okay.
There we go.
You good?
We are all
Very
good.
Okay.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate the introduction, Rebecca. Pam and I are delighted to be here this morning as representatives of the Climate Reality Project Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, which is housed at the hub under Nature-Based Solutions, if you're interested in joining. So what we're going to talk about today is the 2023 Farm Bill, the Food Bill, and Soil as they pertain to solving climate change and raising our voices for legislative change. Next slide, please. So just briefly, we're going to cover farm soil depletion and climate change, the difference between dirt and soil, which is really fundamental, and how regenerative farming can help, as well as what we can change using the Farm Bill. Next slide. Most farming today is destroying our soil. I'm disheartened to say that this is a picture of California's Central Valley. It's a major farming region serving the United States and producing many of our exports. A quarter of the nation's food comes from this area, including 40% of our fruits, vegetables, and nuts. A lot of the soil is degraded like this, and the aquifer beneath the valley is being progressively depleted through pumping. Just pumping over time. So you might be wondering how this type of barren land develops. Hard, dry, compacted ground forms over time as industrial farming fights against nature to produce more food. A primary cause is farmers tilling the land, and that leads to erosion. It damages the soil structure, and it releases carbon dioxide. And there are other factors. Farming began shifting from smaller farms to larger industrial operations in the 1970s due to federal farm policy. It also shifted from diversified farms to monocropping, that is, farms that grow a single crop such as corn or soy, much of it fed to livestock and not people. Repeated plantings of the same crop strip the soil of biodiversity, and that weakens it over time. And to compensate, industrial farms they've applied increasing amounts of chemical nitrogen fertilizers and other chemicals to grow crops. And that also kills the life and life-giving properties of the soil. Over time, much of the soil has become dirt, and it can't support crops, it can't support livestock on pastures without chemical inputs. At the same time, farmers are suffering, and they're increasing debt by an average of 4% per year, and they're grappling with historic losses from flooding and droughts related to climate change or not, as they may view it. Next slide, please. Thanks. So dirt versus soil. Dirt is on the left, and to better understand how soil health fits into this equation, let's compare them. Dirt is dry and lifeless. It cannot grow plants without chemical inputs. When it erodes, blowing away in the wind or running off in the rain, it emits carbon dioxide as well as pollution from farm chemicals. Poor farm practices transform soil into dirt over time in production. Healthy soil on the right, by contrast, is loosely structured. It's filled with microbes. It stays healthy and it maximizes CO2 sequestration when plant roots remain in the ground year-round. Good farming practices improve soil health over time in production, and healthy soil stores more carbon than it releases. Next slide. A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. You can see Franklin Delano Roosevelt here. He is speaking in reference to the American Dust Bowl of the 1930s, with which I'm sure most Texans are aware. FDR signed the first farm bill into law in 1933. I should say Californians as well, and I'm originally from Oklahoma, so you're not left out here, Texas. You're not being singled out. He signed the first farm bill into law in 1933 and implemented conservation practices to correct Dust Bowl era damages. We can and need to do the same thing now. As climate change and healthy soil activist Kalle Rose Ostrander puts it today, a nation that rebuilds its soil rebuilds itself. And that's the historic opportunity that we have now with the Farm Bill. Next slide. An ecological approach of farming that enables landscapes to renew themselves. That's farmer and author Charles Massey's succinct definition of regenerative agriculture. It is continuous quality improvement for the soil. And that's why we're urging Congress to support soil health improving practices in the Farm Bill to reverse the damages that are caused by industrial farming, while simultaneously achieving multiple benefits to human, ecosystem, economic, and planetary health. Next slide, please. So the quality improvement that regenerative agriculture provides leads to restoration of well-functioning landscapes that can support our agricultural needs while also absorbing more CO2 than they release. So here are the 6 principles of regenerative agriculture. Some of them, definitions vary widely about what regenerative agriculture is. This is from Kiss the Ground, and I think it's very comprehensive. So I like to use this particular slide. Least disturbance means that instead of tilling the ground and exposing the soil, farmers plant seeds in tiny holes, and they avoid using chemical pesticides and fertilizers. Below that, living roots. Instead of letting fields fallow between plantings, farmers grow legumes and cover crops, or cover crops can include legumes that naturally restore soil nitrogen. Keeping those roots in the ground can prevent erosion, and it also fosters soil health because it delivers those nutrients. Along the same lines, farmers use soil armor in the form of compost and decomposing plant matter, and both of which enrich the soil over time. Animal integration. Farm animals are part of regenerative operations, and their waste, both urine and poop, as well as treading across the land, add nutrients to the soil. Increase biodiversity. Regenerative farms vary crops to build biodiversity both above and underground. They also plant perennials, trees, and shrubs that naturally keep roots in the ground while also providing habitat for pollinator and other birds and insects, as well as other wildlife. And finally, on the bottom right, something that is not always mentioned in definitions of RA is that regenerative farmers tie their decisions to the natural context, considering things such as the terrain, the climate, the weather patterns in a particular area, and ideal crops for planting in that area. Next slide.
Yeah.
To wrap up, using regenerative agriculture to build healthy soil is a climate change and food system solution both. It can produce net increases in carbon dioxide absorption over CO2 loss, leading to carbon drawdown, more resilience to climate impacts such as wind and water erosion, flooding, and droughts, better moisture retention and groundwater replenishment, higher yields and better crop nutrients, which can support farmers, rural communities, and a growing global population. Ecosystem benefits that can provide extra on-farm income. And something you might know is that farmers often have to go off-farm in order to make enough money to keep going. So ultimately, RA is better for us, the planet, and all forms of life. Now I'll turn things over to Pam, and she will talk about the Farm Bill and CRP's policy requests. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now that you have this background on RA from Peri, let's turn to the Farm Bill because it comes up for reauthorization every 5 years, and this is the year, 2023. Why is the Farm Bill so important? Well, number one, we're all paying for it with our taxes, and a lot of money goes into the Farm Bill. But more importantly, it deals with the risks around our food supply and the quality of the food itself, and of course, its impact on climate change, which is what brought me to become interested in this area. Degraded soils, as you've already heard from Peri, they are causing significant problems with nutritional content in our food and our food supply system. They're also causing flooding and loss of biodiversity and habitats for wildlife, and they're causing, of course, global warming. So we're going to cover what some of our policy recommendations are for regenerative agriculture, and I'm going to call it RA throughout the rest of the presentation. We're going to wrap up with how you can get involved in advocating for these policies. And there will be a link to the full recommendations document that we've created later on in the resources slide. And there will be talking points as well for you to contact legislators. So the Farm Bill itself is enormous, nearly $1.3 trillion forecasted, of which most goes to nutrition, what we know as the food, used to know as the food stamp program. The nutrition component is enormous itself. It's about 84% of the funding. Now, the two programs that we are most concerned about that make such a difference, and we want to modify them, are the crop insurance provisions and the conservation section. Of course, they're much smaller, but they're still huge. We think that those two titles in the Farm Bill give us the greatest opportunity for change. And that is even in an environment where we have probably no new funding in the Farm Bill, no new funding. And we have a control of the House by Republicans. So we are not in an ideal environment, but we still think that substantial change could be made in these titles of the Farm Bill. There are 8 additional titles, but they only total 10 billion altogether. The good news is that there's an additional, this one time, there's an additional $10 billion for climate smart agricultural practices that were passed already in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we do have some opportunity here for using some of that 10 billion as well. Right now, though, we're sticking to the money that is within the current Farm Bill. So here are the 6 policy recommendations, and then I'm going to talk to you about how to advocate for them. The first one is upgrading or enhancing programs, incentives, and funding to help scale up these RA practices in our farm operations. And that would make reducing greenhouse gas emissions a priority for conservation spending. Right now, it isn't a stated priority. Several of the recommendations that we have come up with address this conservation title called Title II. Now, there are lots of subsections, lots of additional recommendations. No time to talk about them in a brief meeting, but I can give you a flavor for what we mean here. The resources that have been available for helping farmers scale up RA have been extremely small. Farmers who embrace RA, 39% to 69% of them who make applications for funding through this section are denied because there isn't enough money. So we want reducing greenhouse gas emissions to become a priority purpose of the conservation title. And payments that increase net emissions to be prohibited. We want that explicitly stated. And we want to incentivize farmers to make the transition to RA by implementing ideas like increasing the government's cost share or their subsidy to 90% for practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then to decrease the government's cost share for irrigation or other practices that don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50%. We're trying to shift some of the funding to areas that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You can pick and choose among these the longer list of recommendations that you'll see in the document. You don't have to cover them all. You won't be able to, but you can choose a few to emphasize when you talk to your legislators. However, you need to always include the idea that the Farm Bill should provide direct, comprehensive support to farmers as they try to implement and scale up RA practices. And you also need to emphasize that all the conservation funding in Title II should be mandatory. It should not be subject to an annual budget cut. That's really, really important. I'll just mention, in the interest of time, one specific recommendation, and you'll have to pick the ones that relate to where you live. But for example, in an area of the country with greater water scarcity, there are recommendations here that you can be sure to emphasize that irrigation projects should be required to include a decrease in the overall use of water. So those of you in the Southwest, who have been or will be in the Southwest, would need to pay attention to that issue. Another quick one would be if you're from a state that has farms in the Conservation Reserve Program, like we do here in Illinois and in Indiana. We want them to ensure that 80% of Conservation Reserve Program acreage, that it be devoted to long-term agreements. Enrollment would be long-term, multiple decades, so that nothing is planted on those acres, allowing the soil to actually get regenerated is the right word. I mean, for the soil to go back from dirt to soil, and that takes a lot of time. So that just gives you an idea of a couple of the recommendations, but there are ones that would be appropriate really for anywhere in the country that you live. The second recommendation deals with the crop insurance title that I mentioned earlier. We've got to reform crop insurance because that currently subsidizes and encourages the kind of conventional farming that Peri was just talking about, which destroys the soil. So we are recommending here that financial incentives and subsidies on soil conservation and diversified crops, that those financial incentives and subsidies be focused on, not as they are now, focused on the planting of one crop year after year, and then depending on fertilizers and pesticides for growing that very crop. The current subsidized crop insurance program under the Farm Bill title, the insurance title, it is problematic because on the one hand, it prohibits growers from adopting many of these soil conserving practices. It prohibits them from doing it. And so this results in a contradiction between the conservation title on the one hand and the crop insurance title on the other. So to give you an idea of what farmers face, if a farmer that's growing corn or soybeans right now that are considered commodity crops, and they are subsidized, if they enroll in a conservation title program, and that requires diversification of crops, then they lose their discount on crop insurance in the current way that the Farm Bill is structured. So essentially, this means that they're forced to choose between a conservation practice on the one hand and subsidized insurance on the other. That makes no sense. So we are recommending that crop insurance be made compatible with conservation, which only, to me, it seems like a no-brainer that you want to do this. One way to do it, though, that we put in here is to reward farmers who use good soil practices, give them a higher premium subsidy, or give them an adjusted insurance premium rate. Another way would be to emphasize incentives for farmers who enroll in what's called the whole farm revenue production insurance option. And what that allows is that the entire farm includes farms with organic and regenerative practices and commodities. That would encourage diversified farms that use organic planting, grazing livestock, instead of putting them into these huge feedlots. That emphasis is agroforestry. That would give them a chance to get crop insurance coverage. Now, there are many other things in the crop insurance recommendations that you can take a look at. The third policy recommendation is to expand the Natural Resources Conservation Service funding for staff and training and so on. If we want to reverse the trend of losing 5.8 tons of topsoil every year. And the farm debt that Peri mentioned, that's rising by 4% every year. Then the NRCS must be fully funded in order to provide farmers with financing, with education, and technical assistance, so that they can make the transition to climate smart practices that are going to restore the soil. This is only going to be possible, though, if the staff are required to be trained on soil health and RA practices, and if more soil health experts are hired in local and state NRCS offices. Even the certification curriculum for technical service providers has to be updated. That would include a new focus on soil health and RA practices. And farmers themselves need support to undergo soil health education and training through the conservation title. There are many other provisions that, again, that you can take a look at in the full document. Number 4 that we think is a high priority is the area of research. Currently, less than 2% of public funding for agricultural research is allocated for RA and organic farming. And this is in spite of mounting evidence that these types of climate smart practices outperform conventional agricultural methods. They actually, as Peri said, they increase profitability for farmers, as well as increasing the nutritional value of the crops and therefore the food that we eat. We need to know, if you don't already, that big ag meaning fertilizer and pesticide producers, they fund much of the research at land-grant universities. And so naturally, the research is focused on conventional farming. We're recommending that all the public funding from USDA be reprioritized to increase climate improving agricultural research. And that would, of course, improve soil health. The 5th recommendation has to do with our food system. Currently, as is the case with everything else, the food system infrastructure is geared to meet the needs of commodity crops, these big one crop systems, conventional agriculture. For example, USDA inspected food storage facilities and process facilities and slaughterhouses. In fact, they can process thousands of animals at a time, for example, and they can give priority to only large producers. And this has made it very difficult for smaller farmers practicing RA and organic farming to even get on the list for inspection. And they now face 6 to 12 months of delays. As a result, what you see is that the number of facilities in the country that do inspections have declined from 10,000 different facilities in 1967 to only 850 today that are geared to the large industrial producers. That reduces the access for smaller farmers. It reduces the chance for RA and organic farming to have any kind of parity. What farmers need is regional and local services and the kind of subsidies that are going only to these larger facilities and producers. So we're recommending, among many other things, that confined animal feeding operations, these are called CAFOs for short, they be limited in terms of the support coming from the public farm bill. they're not only not good for the animals, but they produce large amounts of methane. And if you expand them even more, we're just going to continue to leak methane all across the country from conventional confined animal operations. You know, I mean, what really gets me about this is that as a result, the methane is the cause. The cause of methane is that we now have to have methane digesters that are being supported by the USDA. Each methane digester costs $4 million. Why are we subsidizing CAFOs, these confined feeding operations, to the extent that we are, when they produce so much methane that we have to spend additional money to digest the methane? So that's just one example of what I think of as just a terrible provision in the Farm Bill that has to be changed. The last policy recommendation, and I'm trying to stay within the time here, has to do with agroforestry. I don't think I have time this morning, as I had planned to do, to explain each of the agroforestry practices to you, but I will just explain two of them to give you an idea. We want to expand, of course, incentives and funding for these agroforestry practices because they improve the soil, they help control floods, they do all the right things. And for example, alley cropping. That means planting rows of trees and or shrubs that creates kind of alleys between agricultural crops. What that does is it puts the roots deep in the ground and does all the right things to diversify and improve the soil. Or forest farming. That is a practice where you grow interesting crops like shiitake mushrooms or ginseng. You grow that on the forest floor under a tree canopy. That is another practice that helps sequester carbon, keep soil robust, and keep water in the ground instead of it running off and flooding. So we think this is so important that our Chicago chapter has, with the help of some other folks, has written a separate set of recommendations just for agroforestry. And the link to those is in the resource section this morning. We know that agroforestry can make an enormous difference, and we even recommend that a special conservation reserve program, the CRP program, be established for windbreaks and riparian buffers that are other kinds of agroforestry practices. In fact, we even recommend that greenhouse gas emissions reductions ought to be one of the goals of the agricultural conservation easement program. That it should be stated in there that it is a goal, and we should ensure that this funding becomes mandatory again. It used to be. Now it is subject to annual budget cuts. We need to change that. Moving to you and what you can do. If you don't know who your legislators are, and many people don't, these links will tell you who represents you. You just put in your address. It will find your House representatives and your senators for you. And usually they have a contact form on their website where you can ask to meet with a staff member about the Farm Bill, explain that you know that it's being reauthorized in 2023. You can then call them to get an appointment. I usually start with the contact form and then call them. And you need to know something about that legislator, more than if they're just a Republican or a Democrat. You need to know, for example, their committee assignment, what they championed in terms of projects or legislation, and importantly, how they voted on environmental issues in the past. If you're a constituent, they will likely meet with you. Maybe it'll be a phone call or a Zoom call, but they will generally meet with you if you are a voting constituent. So what do we do next? Well, since the Farm Bill is only authorized every 5 to 7 years, this is the time to weigh in on the Farm Bill. The Senate hearings are already underway. So, yeah, and by the way, you can tune into any of them and listen in so you know the kinds of questions and responses that are coming from people who testify. You can go into the House or Senate website for the Agricultural Committee and tune in on when the public hearings are. In addition to educating your own legislator, I would really recommend strongly that you contact the members of the House and the Senate Agricultural Committees. I believe that the House committees assignments have already been published. If not, they will be this week for the new representatives in the House. The Senate Ag Committee won't change very much, if at all. It's important to share with these Ag Committee representatives what your views are on RA and the Farm Bill. There is a link in the resource section to talking points for the first 5 of the 6 policy recommendations. We're still working on the agroforestry talking points, but we'll have them up on our site fairly soon here. So just in conclusion, the Farm Bill impacts more American lives than any other government program. And that is something that a regenerative farmer and water resource specialist, Eric Fuchs, tells us. The Farm Bill is not just for or about farmers and ranchers. It's about us, all of us. The food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the wildlife we love, and the planet that we want to protect. So we have an historic opportunity here. Regenerative agriculture, RA, is the heart of it. The 2023 Farm Bill offers this once in 5-year opportunity for us to change the entire situation, to secure the ability of farmers to deal with the climate change hazards, to restore our water quality, to sequester carbon in the ground, to improve our public health through nutrition. So making RA and the conservation practices a centerpiece of the Farm Bill is really worth our time, and it will help us toward a sustainable future. So since the negotiations are about to get underway, please start reaching your representatives, as well as members of the House and the Senate committees. So Peri and I are happy to answer any questions today, but if there's no time, then certainly through email, and we'd be glad to share the presentation with you and all these resources that I've mentioned. There's the policy documents, both on RA and agroforestry itself, sample emails that you can send to staff. There's a sample email you can send to your legislator. And there are talking points for all of the recommendations that shorten them down and help you figure out how to talk about them. So I hope that you will take action. And that's it. We're happy to talk with you.
We do have a few minutes for questions, so if you'll either raise your hand or just jump in. I don't see too many hands up.
Richard, Michael, can I make a comment and ask a question?
Please do.
First, I want to thank our own Rebecca Pierce for introducing the Climate Boot Camp to this team, because we're now working with the National Climate Initiative, Extension Center Climate Initiative, to create training for the field agents about this very subject. And I've talked to Don a couple of times about it and really appreciate the input. I would make a comment, though, to be aware of. I was told that it is so politically sensitive at the ground roots in some states that even the title climate reality can be off-putting, that the farming community wants to do things that are helpful to farming. And in that light, it's very acceptable, but Washington forcing them to do stuff is likely to get a reaction. And I'd like to suggest that the goal, when we're talking about climate conservation, maybe is not climate conservation. The goal is perhaps risk reduction. And by risk reduction, I mean drought, weather, and energy prices. The cost of fertilizer this year tripled because of energy prices. Farmers understand that risk. They understand the weather risk. So I just suggest thinking carefully about exactly how that gets positioned in the talking points, because guaranteed the other folks will. Final comment is that we also have some allies in large scale commercial agribusiness, and I'm sure y'all are thinking about mobilizing those allies as well. But for example, we had a speaker from Kellogg's that would, I think, speak about their programs, et cetera. So I'm hoping we're getting the large corporate agribusiness on board with this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Alex, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, in terms of mobilizing chapter members to act and timelines, I'm wondering what would be best, in asking the speakers what would be best for how we can support this as a chapter, like what we can do, like send out the resource list. Is there a specific timeline we're looking at to contact our representatives? What would y'all recommend?
Well, Peri, you may want to weigh in on the timeline, but I would say that it's important to communicate to your members that this is the time for the contacts, because these next couple of months are when the bill will be drafted. It's likely to be drafted by Senator Debbie Stabenow and her staff in the Senate. She is the head of the Agricultural Committee in the Senate, and her team, we've dealt with quite a bit already, and they are saying that the bill is going to be drafted in the first 3 months of the year, and the time for input on what should be contained in the bill is right now. So, and to Michael's point, I really think you made a very important point about the language. We are using the language we've used today with you, but we think that climate smart, improving soil health, reducing risk of drought, etc., is the language to use with your legislators. And so you may want to modify our talking points for your legislator. You know, if you're talking to and I would urge it to be now, if you're talking to someone that you know is environmentally an advocate, a champion, you can use this language as is. But if you're not, if you're talking to someone who comes from a farm area where there's a lot of conservative farmers who want to improve their soil and their crops and their overall situation, but they're not comfortable with, quote, the left climate movement, then you've got to change your language accordingly, as Michael says. So I would send out a call to your chapter for I don't know if you do this. We have action alerts once a week, and we explain the situation in the action alert, and then we ask our members to contact their legislators. And we give them a link to do it and language that they can use. And that's what I think is needed right now in order to have input into the bill before it gets too far down the line and it's too late to change it.
Mel,
Okay,
will-
yeah, we normally send out an email at the beginning of every month, so I can add this to our email for February. Would that be okay, you think?
The sooner, I mean, we're close to the end of the month as it is, so yeah.
Mel, I think you're next, then John, and then back to Michael.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Since I particularly deal with methane on a large scale, we in Texas tend to think of methane as an oil and gas problem, but 40% of methane is generated by agriculture globally, more than oil and gas. And the EPA is currently in a comment period that ends mid-February on enhancing the methane regulations. How does this tie in with the Farm Bill? And what would you suggest our actions be in that regard?
You know, Mel, this is a question that I have, and I don't have an answer yet. I'm trying to look into this because I know about the comment period. And what I haven't figured out yet is whether they're going to require or have further regulations related to methane production of confined animal feeding operations.
Mhm.
And if I can dig in and find that out, we will definitely let you know. But right now, I'm not sure how it's that the EPA thing is directed at the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they've paid attention to this issue, and I think what would be a good idea until we know more is to, if you make comments on the current EPA ruling, then I would add that 40% comes from farming operations, and what are they doing about that? And let me just say that I know for a fact that these methane digesters that have increased dramatically, they haven't solved the problem of methane production on the farms. They have, in some ways, what they've done is allowed larger and larger confined animal feeding operations.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm looking into it, but I don't have an answer for you right now.
Thank you very much.
John Quinn. You're on mute, John.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I grew up in Iowa, so I'm quite, I'm well versed in all this that you're talking about. One thing I put on chat is that, the Republicans, you made a point about Republicans. I don't think you should throw them out or try to talk to them, because they come from most of the rural states. And I know Big Ag, has a big, presence with them. But anyway, I like this idea of risk reduction, soil enhancement. One of the things is subsidizing trees and making hedgerows or making fence line trees.
Mhm.
There's some way we need to do that. And the issue with trees with farmers is it really takes about 30 years to get any kind of cash flow going from tree production. So that's a big issue. But the regenerative farming, as you said, it's going to have to be done on a lower scale. And I got two more points to make, is that cattle grazing is a super important part of doing this, regenerative, because of the nutrients they put back in and the aeration of the soil. And one of the things we absolutely have got to do, and we can create a big business by doing this, is spread the salt or lava rock. That has all the minerals you need to regenerate dirt into soil. And that to me is something that's lacking. I put that book up there, Get Real. It talks a lot about that in there. I'm kind of working with David Munson. He's in my Rotary Club, and he's written a very good book about that. And last but not least, we have got to educate our urban legislators on this. A man that ran for governor of Texas, on the Democratic side, he didn't even know what the word sequestration meant. And I embarrassed him. I'm sorry I did that. I went to his office and shared one of our presentations with his staff. And I said, get your most scientific guy and give him, talk to him a little bit about that, because boy, all he did was pivoted to, hey, I help, rural hospitals. Well, that's not the issue right now. And so our urban guys, people, need to know, I'm going to say specifically what sequestration is. And I'm going to say that's coming from primarily the blue states that are urban and not in touch with, the red states that are rural. So anyway, this farm bill is one of those things that we absolutely can come together on. And I'm very excited to, see your and hear your presentation today. Thank you.
I just want to note that I'm from Iowa too.
Where did you grow up?
Davenport.
Well, I'm from Fort Dodge and LaPorte City over by Waterloo. So,
yeah, farmers are a very big part of my life.
well, them. I mean, this is, what we're talking about today is not what you've just said. It's just become too big of an egg. And my old German, farming family, they did a lot of, they always rotated crops. They always rotated their paddocks. They always had fence row trees. I mean, but their farms weren't big and they made a good living at it. So here's the difference.
By the way, just one other comment on agroforestry. If we have recommendations in our document that will protect farmers who have to wait 20 or 30 years for their trees to become useful in climate and also in controlling flooding and all the other things, because it does take several decades for them to get big enough, and we need protections for farmers so they will go ahead and plant them.
We do need to wrap up Q&A.
I'm done, Richard. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you, John. We do need to wrap up the Q&A in a couple of minutes, but Michael, you've been waiting, and certainly we'll give Rebecca to have the last word.
I just want to put on people's radar that WSU has just announced they have got a commercially viable method for local farmers to be able to produce their own fertilizer using regenerative energy. If we can roll that out, it would greatly reduce a lot of the pollution problems in our rivers and a lot of the fossil fuel use. So that's all. Just be aware and watch that.
If you have anything to put in the chat about that, Michael, that would be great.
Yes, and I'll let Perry say one more thing too, but I was gonna just confirm to everybody that I'll put all of this up in our Discord channel as well, all of the talking points, documents, the the coalition group has put together so much wonderful information if you want to learn a little bit more into detail about everything, as well as scripts for sending an email, scripts for doing a phone call. I'll put all of that in our Plant-Based Solutions Discord group. So look out for it there.
Harry.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment briefly that everything everyone has said has been wonderful. I definitely think that using the word climate is pretty dangerous in this process. I think addressing risk, addressing the impacts of floods and wildfires and erosion, those things are good to focus on. And being someone urban who went to Fresno last summer to speak to a listening session of the Senate or of the House Ag Committee, I have to think of myself. I think of myself in the context of the story of the city mouse and the country mouse. And the two don't understand each other very well. And I think it's really important to step into the shoes of someone from rural America. I think we need to be political party agnostic, but aware. And I think we also can support our regenerative agriculture communities. I try to eat some largely plant-based diet, but I order my meat and poultry from regenerative operations in California, and am increasingly cautious about where I buy my food. So those are things you can do while you're getting involved in activism, because I think the more we walk the walk of regenerative agriculture, the better opportunity we have to learn. Thank you again so much for this wonderful opportunity this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so do I. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peri and Pam, for your wonderful and informative presentation. Thank you, Rebecca, for bringing them in. Wonderful presentation, and hopefully we can help create some action around this issue in the weeks to come. Clearly, we need to get started now. So we just have a couple of more things and we'll be done for the day. So we will move on. Everybody's welcome to stay. Just a couple more things, a few announcements. Jayashri, your announcement is pretty related to the speakers and their topic. Are you prepared to talk at this point?
Yes, thank you, Richard. So hi everyone, my name is Jayashri, for those who don't know, and I am involved with the chapter for quite a long time, about 5-6 years now. So I am also interested in regenerative agriculture, and I have been sort of following, because right now or most of my life I have been a urban citizen. But we do have farms in India. Our family owns farm, and I have grown up on farm. So I know private farming, not industrial farming, a little bit. And so I have been following advocates and those who do it all over the world, not only in the Western world and the US. So there is one from India. She's very how would I say, very well known in the world about her activism, especially in regard to seed saving, how the big companies are, GMO companies are monopolizing, and biodiversity sort of is being killed off all over the world because of their, how the corporations have a big control over it. So I have been following her on Twitter and Instagram, and recently I saw that two reporters, I think, who follow her all over and interview all the advocates for climate and regenerative agriculture, made a documentary on the work she has done so far and her advocacy. So they said, if you want to have an opportunity to screen this documentary, contact us. So I thought I'll get some information before I come to chapter. So I did fill out the form. And so they reached out to me and sent me a link. So unfortunately, it's not free, but they said there are several options for payment. For you can do online viewing or in person. So they are different. I had sent the detail to Richard, and I think the YouTube, Richard has put it in the chat also, and I had sent it to him also. So if you guys, those especially who are interested, could have a look at that documentary like trailer. We can't have access to the whole thing, and form an opinion and let me know whether it's worth pursuing, because I am trying also to raise the money if possible. I have not had any commitment yet to see if we can view it as a chapter online or something like that. So the minimum cost would be around, I think Richard has also done that, about $250. And so that's where we are right now. And I haven't gone further because we're waiting for a chapter meeting and then get a feedback from you all. So that's my presentation. You can click on the link in the chat and have a quick look at the trailer of that documentary.
Thank you, Jayashri. I think you've already got some feedback in the chat. So we'll look at that and we'll be writing about that in future newsletters. Okay, just a couple of more quick things, a couple of quick announcements. Clear your schedules for April 21st to 23rd. I know that's 3 months away, but that's when EarthX takes place in Dallas. It'll be back in Fair Park this year. We had a booth last year. We had many visitors. It was very educational, informative for both the booth staffers and the attendees. We'll need many volunteers to cover the booth over 3 days. We've already paid for the booth at a discount, and we're preparing for that. So we'll start getting serious about preparing for the booth next month. But if you can get that on your calendar, that would be great. We are one of our partners in that will be the Climate Boot Camp. Michael Lynn, many of you I have attended the Climate Boot Camp, a wonderful opportunity to engage your organizations in sustainability activities. So it's a great strategic opportunity for the club to get the word out, and you'll be hearing more about that. The other announcement is something relatively new. If a couple of us went to the Houston Climate Reality Training, which was not only a training, but it had a dual purpose of being specifically for Gulf State climate reality advocates and friends to stop making the Gulf area a sacrifice zone. So the big focus of the Houston conference in October was not turning the Gulf into a sacrifice zone. We had many local speakers, and one big element of that was to try and limit LNG export, liquid natural gas export, which many powerful interests are leveraging over the Ukrainian war and the energy crisis around that. So we were encouraged to get further involved and activities about restricting LNG export and the expansion of LNG terminals in the Gulf South as well as Appalachia. The Sierra Club has taken a lead. They've got some paid staffers that are taking the lead. They've put together a sort of task force, which I've been involved with from the beginning. I don't think there's any point to, I don't think we need a work group also through Climate Reality, but they're going to have a kickoff meeting on the 25th at 6 p.m. I'm going to put the link in chat. And if you're interested, that'll be a Zoom meeting. And a lot of people, mostly Texas, Louisiana, Florida, people from not just Sierra Club, but other organizations, Gulf states for a Green New Deal, numerous other organizations in the area. We've got to collaborate with these other organizations to get things done. So it's not really a Sierra Club effort. It's a combined effort. Let's see.
Richard, Gulf States for Green New Deal is now Taproot Earth.
Okay, thank you, Mel. Yeah, there's a lot of different organizations involved. So take a look at that. I did put the link in chat. And I think that's our business for today. Thank you again to the speakers. Wonderfully interesting topic. Thank you again for the questions. Thank you for everybody for attending. Jeffrey, sorry.
Real quick, Amy did have a question in the chat. Is there a sign-up list currently for the EarthX booth?
There isn't, but I'm going to start working on that. So you can email me and I'll make sure that I keep your name in a little folder. I will not forget it. But there'll be a sign-up sheet very soon for EarthX, and we'll start putting that together. It's a pretty big production, so we're going to get started early this year. Jayashree?
Hey, Richard, I see a new person. Maybe I didn't notice her before. Peyton, has she introduced herself?
Peyton's been with us for a while.
Oh, sorry. That's my bad.
Peyton, feel free to introduce yourself though if you want.
Sure, my name is Peyton. I'm 16 and I've been to a few chapter meetings. It's been a while though, so many of you may not recognize me, but I'm here because I wanted to get more involved in some local organizations. Yeah, and I'm very passionate about the climate movement and want to do all that I can to help the earth. So
Peyton's also on our social media team.
Peyton, there's a lot to do, so we're very, very happy to have you and your youthful energy. Thank you for attending today, and we look forward to working with you more. Jeffrey is going to take us out with a poem. Jeffrey, you do have the floor.
Thank you, Richard. This is the poem some of you may be familiar with called Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for a second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Those who prepared green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now I'll count up to 12, and you keep quiet, and I will go. That is all.
Richard, you're muted.
We are officially done. A few of us will stay on if there's any complaints or issues or comments. We will be sending out a survey soon about meeting time. Saturday morning may not be the best time for everybody. We'd like to reevaluate that regularly. So look for that in the next month. And thank you again for coming. Thank you again to our speakers. And you all have a wonderful weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.